Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to picture a scene with me for a moment. Imagine the most powerful person in the room. They are surrounded by wealth, by armor, by data, and by the loyalty of thousands. They hold all the cards. They have the technology, the strategy, and the numbers. They are looking down at a single individual, someone who is unarmed, uneducated by their standards, and physically insignificant. The powerful person smiles. They feel safe, they feel invincible. They have already written the ending to this story in their head. We have seen this picture painted 1,000 times in history. It is the bully in the schoolyard towering over the quiet kid. It is the empire with its mighty legions facing a band of rebels in the forest. It is the tech giant ignoring the startup in a garage. It is the certainty of the establishment looking at the upstart. But history is not written by the confident. It is written by the survivors. And the most dangerous force in the universe is not a weapon of mass destruction. It is the will of a person who has been counted out. Today, I want to talk to you about the spectacular, beautiful, and terrifying disaster that occurs when the powerful underestimate the powerless. I want to examine the mechanics of this reversal. Why does it happen? How does it happen? And what can we learn from the moment when the giant falls? To understand the victory of the powerless, we must first understand the fatal flaw of the powerful. It is not usually incompetence that brings down the mighty. It is arrogance. The powerful suffer from a chronic condition, a hubris blindness. They look at the powerless and see only what is missing. They see a lack of money, but they fail to see an abundance of desperation. They see a lack of education, but they fail to see an abundance of street cunning. They see a lack of numbers, but they fail to see an abundance of conviction. When the British Army marched into the American colonies in 1775, they saw a ragtag militia without uniforms or professional training. They saw a lack of discipline. They mocked the colonists, but what General Howe didn't see was the power of proximity. The British were fighting across an ocean, fighting for a king they would never meet. The Americans were fighting for their farms, their families, and their front yards. The British had the power of the crown. The Americans had the power of the hearth. This is the first lesson. The powerful are often fighting for an abstraction, while the powerless are fighting for existence. There is a psychological term called the Dunning-Kruger effect, but I think we need a new one, the Goliath complex. When you are Goliath, you believe that the size of your sword guarantees the outcome of the fight. You look at the sling in David's hand, and you see a pebble. You don't see the physics of angular momentum. You don't see the hours David spent alone in the fields, practicing that shot to protect his sheep from lions. Goliath saw a boy. David saw a target. The powerful underestimate the powerless, because they view the world through a lens of resources. But the powerless view the world through a lens of ingenuity. When you have nothing, you are forced to innovate. Necessity isn't just the mother of invention. It is the mother of revolution. We often think of power as being loud. It is the roar of the engine, the shout of the general, the bold headline. But the power of the powerless is quiet. It is the whisper in the dark. It is the network that exists without a cell phone tower. Let me tell you about the Montgomery bus boycott. In 1955, the power was the city ordinance, the police force, and the economic might of the bus system. They looked at the black community and saw a demographic that was poor and oppressed. They assumed they needed the buses to get to work. They assumed they would accept their place. But they underestimated the power of coordination. They underestimated a woman named Jo Ann Robinson, who stayed up late to mimeograph thousands of flyers. They underestimated the taxi drivers, who offered rides at 10 cents, the same price as the bus. They underestimated the people who walked miles through the cold for over a year. They saw a population. They didn't see a community. The powerful look at the powerless and see individuals. They don't see the synergy. They don't see that when a stone is added to a stone, it becomes a wall. When a voice joins a voice, it becomes a shout. And then there is the story of the Arab Spring. In 2010, the regimes in the Middle East were powerful. They had armies, secret police, and billions in oil money. They saw a populace that was tired and hungry. They thought they could control the narrative, but they underestimated the power of the network. They didn't understand that a young street vendor in Tunisia could become a symbol. They didn't understand that a cell phone video could pierce the might of a state media monopoly. The powerful assumed that because they controlled the TV stations, they controlled the story. The powerless knew that the story was in the hands of whoever held the camera. So how do they do it? How does the powerless win? It comes down to 3 distinct shifts. First, the shift in terrain. The powerful fight by the rules. They have invested heavily in the status quo. The powerless cannot win on the battlefield the powerful have chosen. So they move the battlefield. David didn't fight Goliath with a sword. He changed the rules. He used range and speed. The colonists didn't line up in red coats. They shot from behind trees. When you are losing the game, you don't try harder. You change the rules of the game. Second, the shift in perception. The powerful rely on fear. They think that if they show strength, we will cower. But there is a breaking point. There is a line where fear becomes rage. There is a point where fear becomes defiance. The powerful often underestimate the capacity for pain. They think a few arrests will break a movement. They think a few sanctions will break a nation. But some groups of people have been pushed so far that they are no longer afraid of the fall. They are only afraid of staying on the ground. Third, the shift in identity. The powerful underestimate the power of unity. When you tell someone they are worthless, they eventually band together to prove you wrong. The civil rights movement wasn't just about rights. It was about identity. The solidarity movement in Poland wasn't just about labor. It was about dignity. The most potent weapon of the powerless is the butterfly effect of the soul. A single act of defiance, a refused bus seat, a signed petition, a whistleblower's leak creates a ripple. The powerful look at the ripple and see a drop of water. They fail to see the tsunami building on the horizon. And that brings me to my final point. What does this mean for us? We live in an age of staggering power. We have billionaires who can launch rockets into space. We have algorithms that can predict our behavior. We have weapons that can destroy cities. But we are also seeing the limits of this power. We see the powerful in boardrooms and legislative houses scratching their heads, wondering why they can't control the narrative. Why are their policies failing? Why is their empire crumbling? It is because they have forgotten a simple truth. Power is borrowed. It is not inherent. It is a loan taken from the consent of the governed, from the loyalty of the troops, from the trust of the people. The moment you underestimate those below you, you are defaulting on that loan. So whether you are here as a CEO, a student, a politician, or a citizen, remember this. Never underestimate the person in the corner. Never underestimate the quiet one. Never underestimate the movement that looks too small to matter. Because history is not a collection of dynasties. History is a collection of moments. Moments when the seemingly powerless found a crack in the armor, a loophole in the law, or a nerve in the system, and they pushed. They pushed not because they were stronger, but because they were right. They pushed not because they had the might, but because they had the will. So let us leave here with a new awareness. Let us leave with humility, because we may be in the position of power today. And let us leave with courage, because if we are on the bottom today, let us look at history, take a deep breath, pick up our sling, and aim for the forehead of the giant. The powerful may have the armies, but the powerless, we have the reckoning. Thank you.